Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Hunting Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Michael, and once again, we got a good one for you guys. Today, we're actually connecting with Jason Phelps. If you don't know who Jason is, he's actually the founder and I guess the president of Phelps Game Calls. Recently connected with Meat Eater. Amazing guy, funny guy, and has some amazing stories to tell today. So, Jason, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Beyond that, guys, I do want to apologize again. I did about 3 episodes with a different mic and didn't check them until I had completed them all because I did them in very short succession. And my audio quality is a little iffy. That being said, Jason's stories are still great and his quality is great, so I hope you guys enjoy. That's it, guys. Let's go ahead and kick this thing off now and let Jason tell you his stories. Thank you. All right, Jason. Welcome to the Hunting Stories Podcast, man. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Michael.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to have you as a new hunter that learned in the YouTube era. I've seen a lot of your face, so it's nice to get to meet you finally here, man. You're definitely a big deal in the industry, and I'm super excited to hear some of your stories because despite you being a big deal, I feel like you're just the everyday man. Well, not everyone's hunted in a Hulk Hogan outfit, but mostly.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a wild ride. Grew up in a hunting family, and when I say that, it's like that's what you did every fall. And on top of that, not just a family that did it, like in our area, did it very, very well. Right, we were always successful. We were always, killing deer, elk. I'm as far as you can look back, descendant of loggers, and I was the first one to kind of break it. So these guys were always in the woods, always with the animals, knowing where animals were, and so it definitely kind of helped me, shorten that learning curve. At least you're always on animals, and you were getting kind of trained by guys or taught by guys that were good woodsmen. That knew what they were doing, and it's funny. I every once in a while I still kind of chuckle as I lace up. These expensive boots we wear. We wear these expensive boots, and like my dad and uncles, they lace up their like white New Balance tennis shoes because to them, like it was as sneaky as you could be. You wanted to sneak up on those elk in their bed or not know you're coming versus like, So I always kind of chuckle, like they just did it different. They put on their logging attire, whether it was a hickory or whether it was their red and black plaid jacket or their tin pants or their, black iron rain gear, whatever you want to. They just hunt differently than we do now, but those guys were very, very, very effective, and it was nice to learn from those guys. And the evolution of my hunting and what I wanted out of it just kind of changed. I learned, primarily we were rifle hunters or we were muzzleloader hunters, and a lot of it mattered so much on your alarm clock. Like, were you willing to get up early enough to beat somebody to a spot? Like that was that was 90% of the game. Like if you could, where I grew up. For some of those that don't know, I grew up in industrial timberland. So if you can imagine a company that basically farms trees, they've got them on a 35, 40, 45-year rotation. They log them, they cut them. Well, that green up at 5 years into about 10 years when you can see into it, like that's where you're going to kill your animals. And so you're racing in the mornings to these spots where you think or that they're going to be deer and elk, and I just didn't like that game, and so I wanted more out of it. And
understandably,
my dad had worked when I was real young, had worked at a sporting goods store for a little bit before he like fully jumped into logging. My dad had a choker let go, a log slipped out of a choker, comes rolling back down the hill at my dad and the choker setters, like ducks behind a stump, had the log kind of jump him. And my dad hung it up for a little bit, went and found a different job, at a sporting goods. And then like everybody out here, like back then logging paid really well. And so he came full circle, and it kind of, it had come back, and so my dad knew a little bit where I was going with that. Knew a little bit about archery from running a sporting goods section of and he's like, man, there's archery is always an option, and nobody around us was archery hunting elk at that time. There were a couple guys, and they were maybe weekend warriors, and like, well,
were the seasons separate back then, like they are nowadays?
Yep. So we had a separate archery season. And I can remember before I grabbed a bow, I'm like, well, I'm going to go to the local sporting goods store and at least buy some calls, right? And learn how to do the calling. And I had always played with calls and felt like I was good with them, but I'm going to go buy a legit set. And actually, I'm just going to go out and mess around in season. Like I tell everybody not to do now, like, don't go mess with the elk, don't go educate them. But there was nobody back then, hunting. So I didn't feel like I was messing anybody up. And it would have been our archery opener. Nobody was out there. And the very first night we went out and I called a bull into 30 yards. Just cranking.
Awesome.
I'm like, this is easy. And next morning we go out.
Why doesn't everybody do this?
Which would have been, a Sunday morning, and just like clockwork, like call a bull into 40 yards. And I'm like, gosh dang it. And I don't know the first thing about archery, right? I was a guy that would sit at the reloading bench with my dad, and we reload shells. You put your shell in your gun, you sight it in, you pull the trigger. Like I didn't know anything about archery. I didn't know about pro shops. But I did know that this big, thick Cabela's master catalog that got shipped every year had bows in it. And so I picked out one that I thought was in like my Christmas list price range, and it was a mail order bow kit. You got your sight, your rest, everything that was in there, and that was kind of my introduction. Well, then you get it all, and you don't know how to set this stuff up. So that was my introduction to a pro shop. Very quickly thereafter, was having to find somebody that could set this up and get arrows set up, and realize that the bows you bought out of Cabela's weren't the best options, and so you slowly upgrade and become a real archery hunter. And from then on, I never looked back. Like had a lot of success archery hunting elk early on. I would say I had more success calling them in than I did killing them. One thing I didn't have under control was my nerves. I became a very good shot with my bow, everything, but I couldn't figure out like the nerves portion of it, and I had to kind of work through that a little bit. I did end up killing a bull my first year archery hunting, but then had to really like, hey, but you missed 4 of them prior to that. It was really a retraining myself, like go through the steps, create a process that I do every time, and it really kind of helped dial all that in. And like I say, I've never really looked back on rifle elk hunting. I still love to rifle elk hunt. As we apply every year, there's only so many days in the year, and I'm willing to pick up a rifle and go elk hunt to fill in some time. And so I still love rifle elk hunting, but I'd pick archery elk, middle of the rut every day, over rifle elk hunting.
I'm the exact same way. I always say I'm a hunter of opportunity.
Yep.
'Cause I'm not a good enough archery hunter to just go all in on archery. But that being said, I'm going to take every chance I can. But if I get a tag with a rifle, I'm absolutely going to use it.
Yep.
But that was a cool little backstory. Jason, we forgot one thing. Let's introduce you real quick, just for the folks that maybe don't know who Jason Phelps is. They read the name on the podcast description.
Yep.
But who are you?
So just a redneck from a little town in Washington, a little town of PL. I think we've got 650 people here. Grew up, like I say, in a hunting family. Went to school to be a civil engineer, which really kind of led to the game calls. But as I was a bridge and highway engineer, and designing bridges and designing sections of highway that need replaced or improved throughout the state. And then ultimately, at the end of my engineering career, was a grant reviewer. I gave out grant money for transportation projects to small cities. I slowly evolved into the owner, operator, founder of Phelps Game Calls. It was a dream of mine that some of the backstory I just told, the ability to call elk and turkeys, really kind of was my passion within my passion. I loved hunting, but I really loved calling the animals in and challenging them on a very close, getting them very close. And so it kind of led me down the path of creating game calls, which we started in 2009, shortly after, about the same time we had our first kid. So it was, I don't know why I'm a glutton for punishment. Like, hey, let's have a kid, and then let's try to like get this, get a company up and running. But at first, to be honest, it wasn't going to be that time. It was just a hobby. It was something I was just, doing as time allowed, and and then things took off, and ultimately at the end of 2020, so 2021, Meat Eater had approached me. We were working on a collab project already to do some turkey call stuff, and they, kind of got brought up. Hey, would you ever be willing to sell? And it was no at first, and no again, and then slowly we kept talking, and so yeah, now. Even though I've sold the company, I'm still fully in charge, the GM, day-to-day management, still run the whole thing, do all the design work for that. So, yeah, basically the founder and GM of Phelps Game Calls. I got a wife and 2 kids. They all love eating it. The daughter doesn't like to do any of the hunting. My wife and son do like to go on hunting trips. So, yeah, just a passion for it. They're all involved. My wife works here, and then my kids are they've always been involved kind of in the company, in the event. So, we have a great time, and never thought that, doing something I loved for a living was a possibility, but, got lucky and made it happen.
That's super cool, man. That's super cool. We'll dive into some of your stories here in a second, but I want to tell you a quick one. I don't know if you knew this, but I went hunting with one of your sponsored athletes this year. I went with Jermaine Hodge.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And Pat Luttrell was there as well, but I did put a bull down. But of course, I'm with those guys. I'm not doing any calling. But he did give me one of those brand new Hodge calls. What is that line? I know you got one with Tony Gilbert's
the All-American 3-pack.
The All-American triple, yeah. So he gave me one of the Hodge, and I was out there the day after. I was sitting the corpse of my bull, hoping, because I had a bear tag, hoping something would come in. I hear a bugle in the distance, man. Throw that call in, and the first time I've ever really called in the woods, I've called in my truck plenty, but I've never really had the confidence to get out there. But I went out there, and I called that bull into like 45 yards in the middle of a field, just raking. There's one tree, and he's just raking the hell out of it. And I was like, man,
nice.
I should probably stop because he's about to run me over, and I don't have a tag. So, but your calls are great, man. They're awesome calls. It was really, I didn't think it would be that easy to call a bull in. I've never really tried. So
that may be the anomaly. That may be the exception and not the expectation. I mean, it does happen like that at times, but man, you can go 20, 30 times and not have it happen in the first time, like you just said. All of a sudden it clicks and it works. But that's really, you just brought up a good point. One of the things, a lot of people talk to me about, want to get into the hunting industry or they have a business idea. One of the things for me that was always like my driving passion was stories just like that, where it was more about being involved or having a little teeny involvement in the experience, right? Like I didn't do anything. I didn't teach you to call. I didn't do anything, but you used the call that we developed to then provide you with that experience. And, being able to sit in, Southwest Washington and somehow have a little tiny effect on everybody's success or their experience was like a cool thing to hear about or to have happening. And honestly, like that is what drove me more to continue than the business side of this ever did.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, man. That's beautiful. What's funny that bull. So me and my buddy are sitting there hoping for a bear. We get this bull in here. We belly crawl out of the valley so that we can get someone else with a tag in there the next day. Yeah. We're like, get back in there. They're talking, but okay. I just wanted to share that little side note there. But Jason, I know you came here to tell some stories. People don't want to hear my stories. I don't even have very many. They've heard them all. So what do you got for us? Why don't you set the stage, man?
Yeah. And this is a story. I mean, if you've listened to other podcasts, but I'm going to go into a little more detail on this one. That kind of the bull that kind of kicked everything off for Phelps Game Calls, for me, as far as magazine bulls. And it doesn't really, it's not because it was the biggest. It wasn't because it was the first. It was just the way it all worked out. So it was 2012. We were, I was just getting in. I'm 3 or 4 years into making calls. So, it's kind of important that we're finding success. And so I'm hunting just in my backyard. I had no plans to not just hunt, Weyerhaeuser ground and industrial timberlands outside. And it's a very hot, September. There's always a chance of the woods getting shut down, but we're on bulls every day. Having some good success, calling bulls in, maybe things just not working out. I was with my buddy's dad, who my buddy had to go back to work, but his dad had a tag, and we're getting bulls to answer. And I can remember we're maybe halfway through season. I think my buddy had killed a bull at this point, went back to work, so it was just me and him. And I remember wanting to call him in a bull that we had bugling. He's like, no, you just go ahead and you take this one. And so I was shooting great that year. I called this bull in to 25 yards, and I still to this day, it was divine intervention, whether you believe in it or not, or something happened. Broadside, 25 yards, nothing in my way, and like whiffed the thing. Like I don't
Oh,
remember.
no.
I don't remember if I hit a stick, if like what happened, like did something slap my bow? Was there a stick like wound up in the string, the cams, whatever? It missed, and I'm like, I remember telling Tony, like, I have no idea how or why or what. So we looked for that bull, and we heard him bugling down in the drainage, after. So we're like, oh, he's fine, and there was no blood. I found my arrow, and everything was good, and we couldn't get him to call back in. So we were, we're like, a little bit depressed. So we hunted the rest of that day. That was in the morning, hunted all that day, and then came out. And that night when we came out, there was a big orange sign on the gate, closed for fire danger. No, there won't be any more re-entry. And we only had 4 or 5 days of season left, I believe. And so I'm kind of like, gosh dang, what am I going to do? Everywhere's closed down for fire danger. There was one other industrial timberlands, like a different property owner that, has a couple 100,000 acres, that we went and hunted that for a day, got on a good Roosevelt there, for some other, reason or another, it didn't work out. So here I was, they got closed down. And so now I don't know what to do with 4 days left in season. So I'm sitting and him and hawing around. I had never really hunted outside of my backyard. I didn't know how to do it, didn't know what to do, but I had 2 days of vacation left in the weekend. And I remember telling my wife, like, I'm going east. Like I'm not really set up to backpack. I can, but I'm just going to go to the national forest because it's still open. And loaded all my stuff up and called a buddy that I had never hunted with, just a guy I knew. Our wives worked together at work, and he was more of a hiker. He knew more about hiking and backpacking. So I'm like, hey, do you want to go? He's like, we never hunted together to this point ever, just talked. And he's like, yeah.
Was he a hunter before that? You said he's a hiker, but did he hunt much before? He
hunted. He just hadn't found any success up to this point. So, relatively, new to it. But I think he, talking with him, he knew enough. So we load up and we just head for the mountains. A few ideas. I had hiked one of these areas, a couple years before and found elk tracks. So we actually go to his spot first, though, and mess around up there. And berry picking is big in our mountain. Huckleberries or blueberries. Yeah. Our area, his area, was completely loaded, boom boxes on the ridges, and literally people and all the alpine just picking berries, 20 people on one hillside.
Really?
and music, and we're like, this is not going to work. So walk up there, we leave, we come down. And I can remember that night, like driving around like aimlessly in the dark, trying to find a trailhead. And we were it was like 11 o'clock, we're both beat, and we just randomly park at a spot that we didn't really know was the right spot. But when we woke up in the morning, is we kind of like, all right, now all of a sudden our GPSs and our Onyx makes a little more sense. And hey, we actually parked at the right spot. There was a little connector trail. We're like, well, it's, got up an hour early. Let's hike up in here. We don't know what to even expect. So we hike in. It's about an hour hike into the spot, and we're messing around. We're like trying to look as we get up, like we might have a viewpoint from here, like might be able to bugle from here, like just trying to figure it all out. And pulled my binoculars up, and it was just, you couldn't have, I probably never do it again. Like threw my binoculars up, and inside that field of view was a cow. I'm like, whoa, there's an elk right off the bat. After an hour hike, it's just getting daylight. I'm like, well, this is a good spot. And as I was doing, like watching that cow, out of like the other side of my field of view comes the biggest bull I had ever seen in Western Washington. I'm like, holy, I don't remember exactly what emotions come over you, but it's a lot of like, holy crap, look at that thing. Yeah. Like instantly, and he's chasing cows around, bugling. And, you're trying to check wind really quick, figure it out. And not being in this area, you didn't know it very well. We try to, I'm like, well, if the wind's still going down, we actually need to go back around this little mountaintop and come in on this side. and so we quickly make a plan, and we figure out he's got about 20 or 30 cows, so we have to go back around, climb up, and then we get there. And like I'd mentioned earlier, my buddy had never killed a bull, and I'm like, in the back of my head, like, this is an awful big bull to start with, but you're the I'm gonna do the calling. Like, you go down, I'm gonna set you up and get a shot. So we get over, we can hear him bugling the whole way. Like, everything's working good. The wind's about ready to switch and come up. The sun's hitting that face. Like, everything's worked as we planned. So I actually am on a somewhat old hiking trail, and then I tell him, or we kind of point and say, all right, that bull's going to come up in there was a little roll without trees. And on both sides of the tree, or both sides of this dip, there were trees. So it had about a 10-yard wide shooting lane that I figured the bull would come to. And Derek goes down and gets set up, but we couldn't talk real well, and he set himself up originally behind like a wall of 10-year-old, 15-year-old like alpine trees that basically makes an impenetrable wall, which is great for not being seen, not real great for getting a shot. And so now I'm like, my only hope is to pull this bull past like the furthest tree, and that's going to be tough because he's going to see where I'm calling from and not want to come any further. I'd been in this situation enough times that, well, anyways, we start calling, like, we're running out of time, and sure as I guessed it, like, that bull comes right to that spot, knows he should be able to see a cow where I'm at. I'm tucked in pretty good, but doesn't see the cow. And then this bull is 10 or 12 yards away from Derek, just ripping bugles. And this is when I first realized just how big and what caliber of a bull this is. I'm like, wow, this is, I wasn't as privy to scores back then, but I knew if he wasn't the state record, he was very, very close to the state record bull. And
is this a Roosevelt or a Rocky Mountain? Because I know you kind of were jumping around Washington that year.
We had the state, or the record books painted a line, so they actually call these Cascade Roosevelt. So it's like a strip of intermixing, where they just had to put a buffer to Roosevelt. So it's in between I-5 and the Pacific Crest Trail. There's an area that they call basically Cascade Roosevelts, and so I'm watching like the biggest bull I've ever seen in the wild, just cranking, bugle after bugle, and you can hear some cows behind him, and you can kind of see him looking and getting a little bit nervous, like you're just reading his mannerisms and trying to get it all figured out. And I'm only, what I'm guessing, 52, 55 yards away, and I've got a wide open shot, and I've got my bow in my hand. But I'm trying to get Derek a shot and not like, just shoot too early and like ruin what is a slam dunk for him. So I at least knock an arrow, like as I'm watching the bulls, I'm trying to call this thing in, and you could see he's getting a little bit antsy. And so shortly before I thought he was going to leave, I decided to draw my bow back. I hadn't had a chance to range him because I didn't want to really poke out from behind the tree, but I'm like, I've shot so much. Is a little bit downhill for me. So I settled my 50, slightly over on my 50.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, here goes nothing. Like, we're going to kill this bull. Perfect broadside. And this bull is giant body. Like, I can't miss. And I whiz one right over his back.
Oh, no.
And he didn't really know what happened. And then he kind of whirls, maybe a couple seconds later, trots off. And like, what in the heck? And after messing around, it was steep enough downhill, and I had guessed wrong by about 7 or 8 yards that I actually should have shot it for like 40 and shot it for 55, and went over his back. And so I was more frustrated. My GoPro had died. We didn't have any of our other cameras there. And so now it's literally the only story that is going to be told on this bull is how big I think I've got to describe. Like, no, it was huge.
Yeah.
And
if you had to score it, I'm not going to hold you to it, but what do you think?
So I was thinking 370, 380.
Holy moly. Okay. That's
so
a huge bull.
It had a kicker that came off of the one sword, and I didn't know it at that time. I thought it was just a true 7-point, and they actually matched up on the side. And so I'm very, very frustrated. We try to call the bull in for another 20, 30 minutes while he's bugling, chasing his cows, and finally we lose him just into a brushy, steep, rocky mess. And like, well, let's go back. I'm very frustrated. We actually came out of the mountains, went down and had a burger. And this is the day before the last day. So we go back up like, well, we'll at least go listen. So we go down, have a big burger, hike back up. And when we get to the trailhead, there's a truck parked in the spot.
Oh no.
I'm like, Thankfully, this spot could lead to others. So I'm keeping a little bit of optimism. This night, I don't bring my big pack. I don't bring anything. I put a pocket knife in my pocket and like a water in my other cargo pocket and just kind of bomb up there. Go to the spot we originally spotted the elk from, not where we got a shot. And, sure as heck, there's two guys bugling through the basin with that big bull. Like, oh no, like don't say a word, be quiet. He's pretty talkative that morning. He had lots of cows. And this is, I don't want to get into calling too much, but this is maybe where being a good loud caller could pay off, because you could tell they weren't very good callers. And they work their way through this basin, and they actually come out right to the point where we're at, because it makes the way that this basin is shaped is that's like the low pass, and that's their way out. And we get to talking to them, and they're a typical hunter, like there's no elk in here, the cats have killed them all, blah blah blah.
Even though you just watched them bugle.
Yeah, I just shot at the biggest bull of my life earlier that morning. Well, they noticed that I had an arrow missing and started to ask questions about that. And I'm like, oh, I lost an arrow out of my quiver. Just everybody's lying to everybody. So you kind of, we talked to them for about 10 minutes, and they finally went back towards the truck with quite a bit of daylight left. And me and Derek just sat down there, and I'm like, all right, 15 minutes goes by. Like, I'm going to bugle and instantly get a response from him back. He's in that basin. He's kind of working his way up the drainage, but it's going to get dark by the time he gets up there. So we don't call anymore. We sit there and listen, but we end up playing kind of like guess the range game. Like, if he was to come out, like that tree's 55 in this meadow. And remember, this is real rocky, cliffy stuff. So we're on like 10 foot, 20 foot cliffs. Okay. Shooting down, we would have a downhill, pretty steep downhill shot, and we're messing with ranges, just kind of buying the time. He's bugling a bunch on his own, so we decide, all right, last morning we're going to come back up here.
Did your rangefinder have angle compensation yet, or is that not technology that was there yet?
It did. It wasn't the greatest for real steep,
okay.
But it did an okay job at it. So we run back down. We didn't bring any spike out stuff, so we had to climb back up in the morning. We get up way early because we didn't know if those guys were going to show back up or if they were going to leave us alone. We get up there, and you're taking your time. You want to be in the good spot, but you don't want to rush there because you really don't know where these elk are going to be, and there's 40 plus of them in this herd. Well, thankfully we can start to hear him bugle. He had a very distinct, nasty bugle. We can start to, hear him. And so it's like game on. Like, we know he's in the basin where we were at last night. He never got out of that like rock cliffy basin. We're working our way there. So now we start to put a giddy in our step. Like, we're moving a little faster than we were. We don't have to take our time. And we're getting up there, and he's bugling, maybe every 3 or 4 minutes. And there's a strip cliff that's maybe 50 yards long, and that's where the meadow's below this cliff, and it flattens out, and it's probably only 30 yards across. And I remember getting up, like slowly peeking up the rock, and I can see him standing there. He's the first elk I see. And so we back up off the rock, and I told Derek, like, we're going to draw our bows, both of us, and we're going to take a step forward and shoot at this thing on 3 very quickly. So we get back, we're all on the same page, and he's like, this is where like the stupidest things of like ranging the night before helped us, because I'm like, he's going to be at like 38. He's right next to the little lone tree in the middle of the meadow. Like, we're going to shoot him for 38-ish.
Yeah.
So we get out there, and I'm wanting Derek to still, I don't know why, I'm not claiming to be a nice guy, but I'm like, I wanted Derek to shoot, and then I would follow up. We get there, we get forward, it's a very quick 3 count, because you could see this bull instantly go from looking forward to like, now his horns are squared up to you. Like, he's seen us.
1, 2, 3.
He's seen us come. So it's like 1, 2, 3. Well, out of the corner of my eye, as I'm trying to like stay very focused, like, don't screw this up. I can see Derek over there like messing around with his grip. And it took me about a quarter second. He had one of those old trophy taker rests. I don't know if some will remember. They were like a little teeny snake tongue that would like lift as you drew. His arrow had fell off the rest and was stuck between the riser and the rest.
Oh, no.
And that bull I knew wasn't going to hang around for very long, and so I shot without him. The shot was, this is where I really learned to love frontals, but some may question, and I would actually advise people, like, I'd maybe let the emotions get the best of me. I took a longer frontal than I recommend. Like, usually for me, it's like 30 yards and perfect. This one was a little rush, but I did take a frontal at 38. But fortunately, I had been shooting really well, and I just buried the arrow right where I wanted it to.
Yeah. Awesome.
And but the bad part was it's a real sandy basin, and there were 40 elk, and I didn't realize, like, right below me, if I had dropped like a rock, stuck my hand out and dropped a rock, it would have hit like 20 cows were like right at the bottom of the cliff. And then elk just erupted, but he was the first one out. I'm like, well, this is not great for blood trailing or finding tracks. You have a million elk running, so you can't really even listen to what you think. But we got a good bead on the direction he went.
Is this the same elk from the giant guy you saw earlier?
It is.
Oh, bull, you found that.
No,
okay,
this is him. Got a good shot, and so we're sitting there. I have enough adrenaline. I run probably like 700 feet in elevation up a mountain all in one. I'll never be able to do it again. Like called my dad and uncles. They're all at home on a Sunday because they don't archery hunt watching football. And I'm like, hey guys, I just shot the biggest bull of my life. I want you guys to come help or blood trail, or I'll let you know when we find it. So we get on the blood trail and there's nothing. Like,
oh, no,
you're tracking, like, exactly where he went over. You got like broken leaves, like, all right, this is his track. And then he gets out into the sandy stuff, and there's really nothing for us to go on besides a main trail. And we're hands and knees, like, we're not going anywhere fast, like slow trailing. And finally we got like a speck of blood that's kind of mixed in the rocks and the sand. It made kind of a clump. And then we had like another little chunk of, meat and blood that kind of had coagulated and made a little ball. So we're slowly, very, very slow going. At least we know we've I knew I'd hit him and it should be good, but we're just not getting blood, or he had ran so fast that by the time the blood can get down, on a frontal, it's got to get down his leg, down to the ground. With that,
no exit wound, so we got one spot for it to come out. And arrow's probably still blocking it.
With the arrow and the knock and the veins and everything kind of blocking the hole, we're not getting any good pumping. And we're an hour and a half into and haven't went 70 yards. And we finally get to a point where it was like a little lookout before it really dropped off steep, and that bull had stood there for a while, and he just had 3 big piles. When I'm talking big piles, like, somebody had 2 gallons of like foamy blood. He had stood there enough, and that blood, he either pushed the arrow out a little bit or something happened. And from that point on, it was like, a blood trail that anybody could follow with, at walking speed. And turned around the corner after about 50 more yards, and there he was piled up.
Oh man.
And now I was always a successful elk hunter, but like I had never killed anything of this, not even like in the middle, close, like I had always killed these little Roosevelt bulls, and to kill this thing was just on a completely different level than anything I had ever did, or ever killed. And I was able to get cell service and get out to my dad, and a few of my uncles came up, and we actually drove all the way back down. It was a cool morning in that basin. He actually went steep enough in there, so we just kind of put some brush on him, and like they'll be here in an hour and a half. Went down, grabbed those guys, like hiked back in, and got to like experience like the breakdown and caping it and like breaking the animal down with my dad and uncles along with Derek. And so it was cool for them to like be a part of it in the end. I remember those guys weren't really, like I said, they were old loggers at this point, so they were all in machines or driving log trucks, or none of them were in the brush anymore. So this type of mountain hunting, like I remember them all being a little wore out. So I was like shuttling every pack to the top, so nobody had to like pack the heavy packs out. And it was just a cool day, like hiking off the mountain with a bull of that caliber with my family, the guys that had taught me how to hunt elk. My new buddy Derek, for him to get to experience something like that. And then he wasn't.
Did he change his rest the next year?
Yeah. I think we all went to full contained rest. That it can't happen. But yeah, ultimately it was a cool experience. And then long story short, and the magnitude of the bull doesn't necessarily change the story, but ended up being the third biggest bull in the state at the point I had killed him. So there was another one he ended up being 367. So my guess, and I figured out once he was on the ground that there was like a 17-inch extra that came off of a sword. I thought that had matched up. And so anyways, regardless of score, like a great animal for that area. And it was just one of the other thing that it doesn't have to be like, I don't mind hunting special tags or private land, but the icing on the cake was like, this was a do-it-yourself, over-the-counter, like not only anybody in the state, like anybody in the country or world could have bought this tag and like went up and killed this thing. So
that's cool.
It was an awesome hunt. A giant bodied bull. We had never packed that much meat off of a mountain ever, and still to this day, just those giant Roosevelts are just at a different level of size and makeup. But that was one of and then that hunt really kind of kicked off my, I was already passionate hunter, but it really kind of kicked off my desire to like bigger adventures. And from then on, it was more of, all right, I now want to go like live on the mountain with these things. So, the spike tents, the better packs, all this stuff kind of started to happen, and that's really what kicked off my love for backcountry wilderness style hunting, or at least sprinkling that in more to my normal hunts.
Yeah, that's a cool story. I'm glad you got that giant bull. I was a little worried for a second.
Yeah, no, I would have never bet on myself like to get a redo, especially on the very last day of season, but it worked out.
Yeah, it's funny though. You wouldn't be surprised, but more often the stories that we hear about this epic stalk and this giant bull, and then a miss, and that's it. So the ones that got away are always the ones that stick in people's memories. So I'm glad you got back on him. Did you ever get him aged or anything like that? Was he how old was that bull?
I never did pull a tooth. I mean, he had to. You're speculating, but body size. My taxidermist knew a lot about the elk in that area. He had to be in that like 7, 8, 9 range probably. He was definitely at his prime. And I've spent a lot of time up in those mountains since, and only ever found 2 bulls that were even like in his category or class, and none of them have like knocked him off of his top spot since then. And I haven't been able to harvest or kill the other 2, so it's like they're to find it in one day and kill it within 2 days it was a pretty special little set of circumstances there.
Absolutely, giving your buddy the first shot twice, but you still get to shoot twice.
It would have
miss once, and
it would have ruined him for him to like kill that for his first bull. So, fortunately, the next year he went up there with another guy, and he was able to kill his first bull in that same area, just on the hillside, just down from where I shot the big one. So it was a better starter bull.
Yeah, more like a 280 bull or something like that, probably.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Jason. Well, that's cool. I'm glad that Derek got back out there and it didn't discourage him to like have those malfunctions and just like put himself in the wrong spot the first time, and the second time the arrow and the rest issues. I've had that happen to a turkey hunting one time where my arrow fell off the nock, and I actually was like psst, psst, to my buddy. He crawled over, grabbed my arrow, and put it back on the string. But he was so distracted, he forgot to let go of my arrow, so I had to like let go. I'm at full draw, and he's holding onto my arrow. So ridiculous.
That bird let you get away with all that movement, huh?
Yeah, surprisingly. It's in an area in Texas that was not hunted much. I called him in from like 150 yards, just down a dirt road, and he came right in. And we had like a blind, like one of those. It's like 2 feet tall, 8 feet long piece of camo cloth.
Yeah.
So we're basically almost entirely hidden.
Oh, gotcha.
And
gotcha.
Yeah. So the top of my bow, and my buddy was crawling. It was beginning of COVID, so he's like 8 feet away. We didn't We didn't know,
Yeah.
how
What was
far to
going
sit
on?
from each other.
Yeah.
So he's crawling underneath that thing. So he was able to move pretty easily. But yeah, and I actually, it was probably a bad shot, but fortunately the turkey lifted its head, dropped its body, and right in the neck.
Oh,
Dead bird.
perfect.
So
Can't beat
yeah.
that.
Yep, absolutely. Well, what else you got for us, Jason? I know these transitions are always a little weird, but let's keep going, man.
So I'm actually gonna. I mean, I'm very blessed. I get to go on all kinds of adventures, and I could probably pick out hundreds of different stories, and some are gonna say I should probably tell my kids first buck story or this or that. But I'm gonna stay in the same year, before my kid was hunting, and this one was just more of just overall adventure.
Yeah.
For those who don't know about the Bob Marshall, largest contiguous wilderness in the lower 48, it's an adventure, and we had booked a hunt that was going to start 10 days after I just killed this bull in Washington. So, mind you, I had never killed anything good, but we had kind of saved up and said, all right, we're just going to go to the Bob. Me and my dad, one of my uncles, a couple of my buddies are going to go in. So there's a bunch of fires in the Bob this year. We originally had a 32-mile horse ride in to camp, and we ended up having to go 39 because we had to ride around the fire and then come in from a different direction. So to start, like, one of the most beautiful rides in ever, you got the Flathead River, you got the runs through the Bob. It's just absolutely beautiful. A bunch of mosaic type burns, historical burns in there, and it's just absolutely beautiful country. And you're taking that all in. And this is, sometimes I struggle with, like, I take what we get to see as hunters for granted, but like on this trip, just riding the horse, I knew I wasn't hunting that day. Like, I was able to just kind of take everything in, all the sights, sounds, the crystal clear water, the old horse bridges that go across the Flathead, that the old outfitters have built and the Rangers have built. It was an awesome, wild place. But then I get far, we've been riding since sunup. We knew 39 miles is going to take us basically dark to dark on a good day. That's no horse wrecks or and nothing gets western, like a perfect day.
yeah.
And then about halfway in, something changes in your mind where no matter how far I've hiked in, like even if it's 9 or 10 miles, I can always just grab my stuff and leave if it's too bad, right? As long as we're not injured bad enough. And something changes in your mind where it's like, you're now more than a day's ride away. You just can't hike out of this place now at this point. And it kind of changed my perception, is like, or my outlook on the hunt. It's like, you're a long ways from the truck, like an entire day's worth of riding. And it kind of added to the magnitude of the hunt. So we get into camp, and my buddy actually who'd moved from here was guiding. So he was actually our guide, but he was, a good buddy that was just working for the guy. And he's like, man, I think our best bet is to get up early in the morning again. Like, remember, we just rode for 18 hours, get on the horses, and then spike out another 8 miles from base camp. So now we're, 40-ish miles away. Like, all right, if that's what you think. So me and the guy I was going to hunt with to start with, we grabbed all of our stuff and everything to spike out, and we took off in the morning. So we kind of missed that morning hunt and got up into an area and just kind of hadn't been in there for a year. So we kind of cruised the ridges, try to get it all figured out. And it was a very, very, I mentioned, the fire, danger here. It was also very hot in the Bob, and a lot of the food above timberline had burnt up. So it really, we were all kind of scratching our heads like, oh boy, like, where are the animals going to move? Are they going to be down in the bottoms more? Are they going to be like right at the fringe? And so we did that first day we got there. We only had a half a day left. We kind of did a quick run up the ridge and kind of did let's just go up high, see if we can hear any bugles. And we got back, and really that first day we got nothing. So the next day we're like, all right, let's go low. We right out of camp, we're going to go down into the creek base, and then we're going to go kind of up that creek until we get to the ridge line. And right out of camp, a couple hundred yards away, there's a sow and 2 cub grizzly tracks. We're like, oh, this is awesome. They were that close to the camp last night, and you're John's like, oh yeah, those were last night. And he's like, they probably swung by the same water we're going to want to swing by. Like, there's a wallow. We're going to go see, like, if there's water in that and if the elk have been using it. And we literally follow those bear tracks all the way down towards the creek and now we're following them up the creek. I'm like, I don't know a whole lot about grizzlies, but I always thought following them seems to be like the best way to have a conflict. Right. But it was a way we had designed that hunt. And So we're occasionally bugling as we go up, back and forth, and we're following the grizzly bears. And finally, they kind of veer off to the right, which is good because we want to actually veer to the left. And we're going up there, and finally we get a bugle. And I mind you, this is a rifle rut hunt. The Bob has rules where once you're like September 15th, you can start hunting the Bob with a rifle for all species.
Okay.
So we're in there rifle rut hunting, and these elk in the Bob they really don't hear anybody, especially when you're 40 miles in. Not even the outfitters, you know, they only get to go to these places with a few a few clients that'll even are willing to get there. So they have clients, and they have clients like us that are like, all right, we're willing to go do whatever. So we get in and we get set up, and he's like, I'm going to go 50 yards behind you and start calling. Well, we had called once or twice from there, and before my buddy had ever got shot, or like even close to set up, he's still walking away from us. This bull pops out on the other side of a meadow at 120 yards away. And for a second, I freeze because I just come off of archery hunting, and you're like, actually, there's a little disconnect. Like, hey, dummy, you got a gun in your hand.
Yeah.
Like, shoot it now. So I mean, the bull stopped almost broadside. I've got a 7 mag, and I pull the trigger, and my buddy yells and jumps like, what the hell are you doing? Then he sees the bull running off. I'm like, hey, he was here already. And so I was able to, on that second morning in the Bob, he's probably what I thought was a 300-inch bull, a great 6-point, had come strolling in. And these bulls in the Bob, like I said, they don't hear people. So they hear a cow on a year. He was in full motion, trying to come get at that cow. And so I shot him, he piles up, and very hot still. So we get them all broken down in grizzly country. Like you're trying to keep blood off of you because you have to spike out with sows and cubs 200 yards from your dang tent. And so I do a bunch of stupid stuff like set the head down next to my tent, bloody neck. And it's just like, you just aren't thinking. Well, my buddy says in the morning, I'm going to ride all the meat with the mules and horses back to base camp. I want you guys to hunt, around this mountain and then down to the main trail, and I'll pick you guys up, around lunch, noon or 1. So it was a very sleepless night because I realized that all the dumb stuff I did with blood and the grizzlies being as close. And so me and my buddy take off, get a bull to respond real quick. It sounded more like a donkey than an elk. And I would have never thought it was an elk if it hadn't responded like very quick to my, calls. And then he did it again. We run down the hill, call him in. It's a real small, raghorn. So we kind of let it go. And, we get going around the corner, and I get another bull to answer, and this thing sounds big, but we, even with rifles in our hand, we can't figure out, like, we got brush in our way, and we called to him for probably an hour, and we're like, gosh dang it. And so I can remember we ended up taking a break, having our lunch and messing around, and we get going there's a mountain, like a knob, I would say, to our right, and we're kind of working around it, keeping it to our right, and then we get to the edge and we got to go down. Well, we're kind of working our way too, and as we're going, we see a big rock maybe 100 yards ahead of us start rolling down the hill. And I say big, like maybe a 50, 60 pound rock, maybe 10 inches, 12-inch type rock. And it rolls. I'm like, gosh dang it. There's a freaking grizzly up here, right? Rolling rocks up above us looking for bugs and stuff. I'm like, I do not want to deal with this. So I told my buddy, let's just walk by real quiet. Wind's coming downhill. We're going to be fine. Like, if he doesn't see it, or if they don't see us, we'll just walk by. And we get to about that spot, and I peek up, and all you can see is the body of an elk. It had obviously, like, rolled the rock walking on the edge of the trail. And I had just killed a 367 bull. So I was very, very, like, I understood what made a big bull. And this bull was just standing there broadside. My buddy still has a tag. And it was the biggest bull to this day I think I've ever seen in the wild at 100 yards broadside. My buddy, if he listens to this podcast, is going to hate me, but he completely froze. Like, couldn't figure out how to shoot, couldn't figure out how to get a rest. And I still had my gun because I had a mule deer tag, and so I'm trying to use my scope to try to, like, look at horns. And I just, like, how steady are my, like, I would not miss this bull's vitals offhand at 100 yards.
Yeah.
And I remember telling my buddy, like, shoot, like, go. But this bull literally stands there for over a minute broadside, and we don't get a shot off. And then we watch him turn and walk straight up the hill. And he was all of my bull plus some. Just
no way.
Giant. And I asked my buddy, he's like, I don't know. I don't know, was kind of the answer. And it was interesting. Like, to this day, like, because he's usually pretty confident and, normally would be good. I don't know what happened there, but a legit big bull. And so we end up, our hunt was to leave that area and go try some other stuff. So we actually never hunted him again. I think we probably could have killed him if we had stayed there. But, long story short, my buddy had killed a bull, more of a raghorn a couple days later, later in the hunt. Yeah. And then I was able to go up and kill a really old, mule deer way back in there, navigating a bunch of cliffs early in the morning, got up into a crazy basin, and it was just dead. Like, they were really hesitant to have us go to this basin anyways because they had what they thought was like a state record type mountain goat in this basin. So they didn't really want us to go in there deer elk hunting because goat, I think, started October or something, or maybe that's just when the hunter was going to come in. And it was like, well, we're not going to disturb this because we hiked in here to look at nothing all day. And we're glassing. Well, my buddy, who's the guide, gets up to take a leak and kind of just walk around the ridge. Well, in that very instant, you could start seeing a buck down below us walking, and he's going to walk 50 yards below us when I spotted him. And so we're trying to, like, hint to him, like, stay there, like, do not come back, like, just hang out. And he's trying to, like, figure out why or what. And then about that time, I just shoot the buck at 50 yards down below us. And he's like, well, was it a good one? Like, I said, yeah, it was very mature buck. And so long story short, we were, shot a buck. I have this big, giant long range rifle built, for this hunt, not specifically, but I shoot an elk at 120, I shoot a buck at 50, and it ended up being a great mature heavy horn, bob buck. And thankfully that goat was never even in that basin that morning, so it didn't mess it up. And that was the last day we could hunt. It was the bob is just, I don't want to put any more pressure on it because I know it's downhill a little bit with grizzly and now wolves, but man, the bob is one of the few places that really kind of turned me on to, you need to take in like the experience, the adventure, the sights and sounds just as much as the hunt. Now, don't get me wrong, I can see and admire all those things just as much, but I still want to kill an animal at the end. Like, that's my main goal. But like, that has some value or some benefit as well as just being in cool places where you honestly felt like, hey, there's probably haven't been a whole lot of people that have walked in this place before, or stood where I'm standing or seen this site. All of that stuff was pretty dang neat. And there was
40 miles back, man. It's entirely possible that you stood on some ground no one's ever stood on before.
Yeah, and it's just,
which is cool.
It was smoky in the area because that fire that we had to ride around, so it made for some really cool pictures. And it was an adventure that I want to do again, but I haven't got a chance. But yeah, we ended up killing a few other elk. Everybody killed their deer, and we had a good trip. And I think everybody should go on an adventure like that you can also tie in some hunting at some point.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Your story actually gave me some flashbacks, because I know every time I've learned this lesson, I don't do it anymore, but like, I get up to pee. Take your gun with you.
Yep.
Take your bow with you. Like when you said he got up to go to the bathroom, I was like, oh no, he's just blowing something out. But that's funny that every time I've ever like left my weapon out of reach, is I know an animal's going to show up. So I've stopped doing it. Animals have stopped showing up.
I have a real short story I'm going to piggyback. I did the opposite. So Perfect. My wife had drew an elk hunt one year, and I had brought my buddy along, the one that froze up on the big bull there. And they, we were glassing early into the morning, later into the morning, and they start to get tired. And bear season, we had like 3 more days on bear season. There was quite a bit of bear sign. So I said, well, if you guys are going to sleep, I'm just going to take the gun down the ridge and go look off the end where these bears, have been in that brush. And I'm going to kill a bear during your elk hunt. I get probably 250 yards down the ridge, and they're up there sleeping, kind of taking a nap. And there's an area in this unit where it goes from very, very rugged, like wilderness country, to the next ridge over is logged. The country drastically changes on the ridge we're sitting on. And so 400 yards behind us is a clear, like an old overgrown clear cut. Well, as I'm down there dinking around looking for bear, you can start to hear like some animals like crunching around, breaking sticks and brush across there. Well, they kind of wake up. I finally get my eyes on it, and it's two of the biggest bulls I had, these stories all, but like legit, a legit 350 bull, and then a bull that dwarfs him with like kickers coming out of both swords. So just and goodness. There I am, 250 yards away from my wife with the gun.
Oh, no.
And she can see them going across the clear cut. I can see them going across the clear cut, but I don't have this special tag to pull the trigger. And we literally watched two bulls that were definite shooters. One, an exceptional bull, walked, and they didn't run. They just kind of meandered through the clear cut. She could have got all kinds of shots at them. My wife's a great shot. 400 yards would have been a gimme with the rifle. But, it was, walking away, taking leaks, things like just sometimes have a way of working against you.
Yeah, as soon as you do something that's going to take the opportunity away, the opportunity is going to show up. Like, that's just how hunting works, right?
Yep. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, Jason, man, this was a lot of fun. I know we got limited time, so why don't we wrap this thing up, man?
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll have you back in the future. I know that you have a million more stories, but why don't you tell the people where they can find you? Or if you want to, you can walk off into the sunset. Whatever works for you, man.
We're good. So a lot of ways to reach me. We got the Phelps Game Calls Instagram page, which Dirk and I still manage mostly. I've got my personal Jason Glenn Phelps Instagram page. I've now got 2 active Facebook accounts after 2 years. Zuckerberg somehow let me back into the original, so now I'm that guy with 2 Facebook accounts. I'm not that big a deal, but I'm trying to manage them both. And then through our web page, there's very easy to get a hold of. Try to be accessible for questions or product questions or just shooting the crap. I love to talk and BS hunting with as much as I can. So
yeah, man. Well, thank you. This was a lot of fun, and like I said, your calls are great. Called into some big bulls with that All-American pack. I'm actually going to be connecting with Tony Gilbertson here next.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to have a bunch of your callers on here in the next couple of weeks.
Set Tony up. Don't tell him it's coming, but ask him how he likes the Impossible burgers or the Beyond Beyond burger.
Okay. All right, we'll do.
Just surprise him with it. He accidentally ate. He didn't know, but he had ordered an Impossible sausage sandwich at Starbucks when we were at the last trade show just a couple weeks ago, and it really set his life back. So make sure to give him some guff about that.
We'll do.
Right.
I'll make sure to fit it in somewhere, man. That's pretty funny.
All right,
Jason. Well, thanks again, man. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time and your stories, man.
Yeah.
They were a lot of fun.
Appreciate you, Michael. Have a good one.
You too.
All right, guys, that's it. Another couple stories in the books. I want to thank, of course, Jason for coming on the podcast. Couldn't have done it without him. And he had some very enjoyable stories. Had a lot of fun. And I wish we had a little bit more time, and I'm sure I'll have Jason back on again in the future, especially because I owe him one, right? Because my audio quality here is not good, guys, and I apologize to you as well. I did record 3. This is episode 2 of 3 that I recorded this way. I will have it fixed in the future, but I apologize and bear with me while we get through my transition through some tech equipment that I'm running through. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you go check out Jason Phelps on Instagram. Check out Phelps Game Calls. They got turkey calls, deer calls, elk calls. They got everything. They're pretty awesome products. I've called in some animals with them, and I am not a good caller. So please check them out. Everything's in the show notes. Beyond that, guys, get out there and make some stories of your own. Thank you.